Hello everyone, what is going on? To this game, you will see Wesley So with white pieces against Magnus Carlsen with the black pieces from the Meltwater Champions Chess Tour. Alright, Wesley So starting with e4. And Magnus Carlsen, he replies with e5. He usually goes for the Sicilian, but in this case he didn't. So Wesley So continues with knight to f3. Simple reply. And Wesley So goes for the Italian. This square would be the Rue Lopez, but he decides to go for the Italian. Magnus Carlsen plays knight to f6, typical move in the structure. Wesley So brings his knight into the g5 square, attacking black's weak f7 pawn, but of course he's forced to play this line to protect this. And Wesley So captures, and black plays a5. I used to play this position with black a lot. In my opinion, it's pretty strong, and if white doesn't bring his bishop back to one of these two squares, then white's gonna be in huge trouble. White plays bishop to b5, checking Magnus. He has to play this move, of course, and captures back. For now, it seems like black is down one pawn and his pawn structure looks kinda weak, but you will see that it's pretty aggressive, an aggressive opening for black. So if you're looking forward to an aggressive opening, this is one that you should definitely look at. And as I mentioned, white has to bring his bishop back to this square or this square, otherwise it gets into huge trouble. I can show you why. I mean, it's because of different attacks, like moving the knight and attacking this knight at the same time. Magnus replies with the best move, knight d5. Wesley retreats, and he simply continues development. Castle, both sides castle. So now basically the opening is over. After both sides castle, the opening is calls over. Another developing move, rook to e1. And if you look now at the structure, I mean, all these four pieces here have never been used. And on the other hand, white has got a good bishop, like it's all squares are open. This knight is maybe kind of displaced, but it will get strong soon. And with this move, f5, black starts the attack, sacrificing another pawn. White captures the pawn, and queen to f6, forcing the knight to come back. Black continues pushing his pawns with g5. It's a risky opening, since you open up like the king side a lot, but if you know this opening pretty well, it's a really good one. Wesley kicking the knight and on a brilliant d5 square back. Knight to f4 plate, and here as you can see, white struggles a lot with developing this pawn right here. And at the same time the bishop is not protected, so this white light square bishop is kind of a problem, and he retreats it. And as you can see now, the engine bar also gives black a small advantage with this move, and Magnus of course finds it. Wesley So going for development into the center with d4, and now as you can see, he's basically offering his knight, which is, first of all, it looks kinda weird, but as you can see, like, also the computer kinda suggests that move. Because what happens if, for example, white, I don't know, first of all, he can't move the knight, but if he moves his knight to any place, it doesn't matter. You can see like the engine bar giving black a huge advantage. And the game continues like this. It's still white winning, even though he sacrificed his knight. Because if you look, black has 5 pawns and white still got 7 of them. Magnus captures and queen captures. And now look at this pawn here, which is pinned to the rook and just defended by the black knight. So that means if you develop your bishop to this square and the knight has to move, you win this pawn. But on the other hand, this knight has to move because it's attacked twice. So Wesley and Magnus brings his knight back. And Wesley playing queen c3. I don't know if this was... It looks kind of weird because usually that's the square that every knight wants to be in. And here Magnus, instead of grabbing this free pawn, it seems free, I mean the knight would be hanging. Let's see what the computer would suggest. If you grab the knight, now white grabbing this knight, you can see it's like a fork. So it would be equal. It would be a pawn and a rook for 2 knights. But he doesn't go for that variation. Magnus simply retreats his knight. Wesley continues pushing, and Magnus puts his black square bishop back, right back to c7. And here the attack comes. White now trying to exchange these 2 pawns, opening up the rook file. But of course he doesn't allow that and continues pushing. And here Magnus actually didn't grab this pawn back, which first of all seems kind of weird, because if you grab this pawn and then this one, or simply push, you kind of get an advantage, it seems like. But as we can see, he recaptures immediately, which is probably a blunder, because if you look at the engine bar, it's +1 and definitely suggests other moves, such as bishop to c4, attacking the knight twice, forcing the queen to come back or to trade, and then black kind of being in trouble. But he didn't go for that move. He took it and white took back. That was maybe one of the blunders that Wesley so made in this game, probably the biggest one. Knight takes queen, now bishop to c4. It's blocked by the bishop to e6. Captured, captures back, and now the rook captures the knight. As you can see, these 3 pieces have still not been moved. Black captures a pawn, and white captures the pawn. And now, as you can see, it's still equal, even though white is basically up 2 pawns, but its development is pretty bad. So you might think that this move would have happened. It looks pretty logical, but Wesley of course saw that bishop coming on to e5, attacking the rook, which would be lost. And so he decides to step his rook back. The engine bar doesn't like the move at all, because now Magnus can exchange rooks. And since he's up in development, he can make use of that. He develops his knight. Magnus capturing the pawn. He can't capture back because the rook is hanging. And he can't even capture the rook first because then it would be mate. And so he decides to develop his last piece, the bishop, the last minor piece. Magnus playing bishop to e5, pinning the rook and the knight to the rook. Both sides capture. White captures the rook. And now black white placing his rook on b1. As you can see right now, first it seemed like black was down material like 3 pawns, or was it 2 or 3 pawns, but it was up in development, and sometimes that's exactly what matters, being up in development, and on the other hand sacrificing pawns for that, to reach that. And now he's got 2 pawns on the queen side, and he will definitely make use of that, as you will see soon enough. Trying to bring his king in, rook to e5 played, bishop retreated to e3, and here it comes, the pawn push. Rook to c1, kinda avoiding pushing this pawn, because then the bishop will fall. So he decides to push this pawn over here. Wesley playing g3, Magnus playing b5, and now he simply tries to keep up the position. He tries to hold. He kinda knows that it's impossible to win this, since he has no time to push these 3 pawns against 2 pawns, so he has to stabilize the position. Magnus playing b3. White captures back. This already looks really dangerous. And now you might think white should move his king towards the square, but Wesley goes for this move. And Magnus, of course, putting his king farther to the center, even closer, and Wesley trying to trade off bishops. Of course, he doesn't allow that. And now he tries it again. Now Magnus captures it. If you look now at the pawn structure, it's super weak. And black still got that one pass pawn. He brings it all the way back. Wesley trying to defend it. But now the rook is stuck on the square, and the king can come all the way down. King to g3 played. Magnus plays a4 to attack this pawn. Now it's a race of kings. White's rook has no square and black's rook has all these squares. And it also has like one check and back. And that's exactly why the white king has to retreat. Now Magnus coming closer to the important squares. Now he tries to block the king. I don't think this was a good move, since also the computer really hates it. Because if you look, this square here was already protected. I don't know, maybe a move like this would be better. But no, that wouldn't make that much sense. But of course, bringing the king closer towards the rook would be the key. But Magnus goes for this variation. And so you gotta defend the pawn again. Wesley retreating again. Magnus going there. And now, instead of going back to the square, he decides to go left. And Magnus uses this chance to finally block this line for the king. It's no longer available. He tries to come closer to the action. Magnus too. And now it's a race for the kings. Plays there. And now all white pawns are in danger. As you can see, look at the engine bar, it's at -5, which is completely waning. Playing this move. Magnus playing f3. If you wonder why he didn't capture, it's exactly because of that move. because now if you have a look at the situation, the position, black simply doesn't have that much space anymore. And that's exactly why I went for this move here. White trying to block the pawn with the king. And now white, he could have grabbed on the pawn as the computer says, because then he wins this pawn, moves the king there, and wins this pawn as well. And the other pawn, so it would be two passed pawns would be winning. But he continues with g2, and now that's exactly where Wesley so simply resigns. It's -7. He has no chance. He can defend one pawn, but then he's gonna grab this one or this one. So basically we'll always create a passed pawn on these two lines. He will give up the a3 pawn, but we will gain two other pawns for that one. So yeah, that was the game 2 of the finals at Meltwater Champions Chess Tour. Hope you liked it. Bye.